Welcome to the Tech Talks by Microsoft EMEA. Today we will talk about how to manage Azure Stack HCI via Windows Admin Center, and we will have a nearly full hour live demo here, so we will see many of the management steps live in Windows Admin Center. My name is Manfred Helber. I'm a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in the category Cloud and Data Center, and so my focus topics are Storage Spaces Direct, Windows Server, Azure Stack HCI, and the Windows Admin Center we are using in this session. Because we are focused onto the live demo, I will switch several times to the full screen to ensure that everything is perfectly visible for you. So let's start with a live demo at the beginning of this session and have a look at the Azure Stack HCI configuration in Windows Admin Center. So before we start with the Windows Admin Center itself, let's have a short look at the node of such an Azure Stack HCI configuration. I will take the node 31 here. I will connect to this node 31, and here we can see, okay, this is a server core-like installation, so it's a reduced graphical user interface. We have the server configuration utility that supports different choices via entering the number here, and we could configure this node here. But this is not the target when we are working with Windows Admin Center, because when we are working with Windows Admin Center, we are using a web-based graphical user interface to manage Azure Stack HCI and also to manage Windows Server and Windows clients. We are focusing on the Azure Stack HCI management in this session here. So I will go to the cluster 30 here. Cluster 30 is one of my Azure Stack HCI clusters, and this cluster here is a 3-node cluster. If you attended the last session last week Monday and the session 2 weeks ago, you already know that we can have 2-node clusters. The 20 is a 2-node cluster, the 30 is a 3-node cluster, 40 is a 4-node cluster that was expanded to a 5-node cluster. We can have up to 60 nodes. What's absolutely new with Azure Stack HCI, and we will also have a look at this in this live demo session, is the single node configuration. This was announced last week at Microsoft Build conference. And with the single node configuration, we can have all these Azure Stack HCI advantages on a single physical server. So this is a great news we had here at Microsoft Build last week, and we will see this single node configuration also today here in this Tech Talk by Microsoft EMEA. Let's go to the 3-node cluster first. So what we can see here is the Windows Admin Center dashboard. The dashboard provides an overview of the status of my Azure Stack HCI cluster. It needs a few seconds till it's loaded completely. I can see here my cluster has no alerts. The first important information on the left-hand upper corner, everything is fine, it's up and running here. Then we have the Azure Connection. We discussed this in the previous sessions of the Tech Talks. Azure Stack HCI needs a connectivity to Azure. We will not run into any issues if we are disconnected for a few hours or a few days. We will see this later in the configuration. But we need the connectivity. We have to connect our Azure Stack HCI to Azure, because Azure Stack HCI is charged based on the physical CPU cores via an Azure subscription. Then we can see our servers. Servers are healthy, the drives are healthy, my virtual machines, 4 are running, 2 of the machines are offline, the volumes are healthy. I can see the CPU usage, the memory usage, and so on. Everything is there in this dashboard. When I'm scrolling down, I also have some information about IOPS, about latency, and I can switch to a daily view and to a week view here to see also some historical data. This is possible because Azure Stack HCI provides its own, let's say, data storage for collected performance values and status values. And this information is collected when we go to the volumes, to the inventory in the cluster performance history. The cluster performance history is a volume I did not create. This volume was created when I enable Storage Spaces Direct. Last week, we have seen the deployment wizard for Storage Spaces Direct in the Tech Talks. And when I deployed Storage Spaces Direct on such a cluster, the cluster performance history was created. The cluster performance history, you can see here the size, it's 20 gigabytes. And this stores the data to allow us to select between different time frames, to select here hours, days, weeks, month, to also see some historical information here in this chart here. So here I can, for example, see in the latency, something has changed here. The latency went up here on a specific date. I can zoom in here, can select this value and can see, oh, what happened here? Maybe I changed something at the firmware. Maybe I changed something at the switch configuration. So I can see the latency went up from this level to this level here. So here was a change that had a negative impact on our latency. And so we can see this in the historical data on this configuration. So let's go to the volumes. The volumes is the tool to create new volumes, to manage existing volumes. And I will select my inventory. You can see different volumes that are already available. And I want to create a new volume here. And before I proceed with the volume creation process, for sure, you can use the chat functionality on YouTube, on the channel where you are listening, to send in your questions, to send in your comments. So if something is not clear what I'm showing to you here, or if you have an additional question, or if you want to see something specific here in the live demo, feel free to send in your comment. And I will take this comment and try to answer your questions, try to show you what you want to see, and take your feedback for later sessions. Okay, so we are in the volumes tool here. I want to create a new volume in the first step. So creating a new volume, there we have first a name for the volume. The volume name is more like a description. Then we have the resiliency. The resiliency depends on the number of nodes we have. In a 3-node cluster, we can have the 3-way mirror. Let's do it this way. Let's take a 1 node. Sorry, no, we start with the 2-node. The 2-node has 2-way mirror. And the 2-node knows something like a nested 2-way mirror. It's a mirror in mirror. So nested 2-way mirror, and it knows also the mirror accelerated parity. Mirror accelerated parity means we have a mirror across the servers, and locally we have a parity on the servers. In the 3-node configuration, we have only the 3-way mirror. Three-way mirror. This means we have a copy on each server. So we have the original extend, so storage spaces direct in Azure Stack HCI writes in extends, in slabs. These are entities of 256 megabytes of size. And here we have 3 copies of each of these extends on each server 1. Beginning with the 4 servers, we don't have anything additionally. The 4-node plus, we have the 3-way mirror, and we have the mirror accelerated parity. The mirror accelerated parity here. This is what we have in this 4-node configuration in Azure Stack HCI. And with the 4-node configuration, 4 nodes, 5 nodes, we can have this additional servers for using additional capacity, not for enhancing the resiliency. So let's create a volume with a size of 1 terabyte here. And this will take a few seconds till the volume is created. So the volume creation process has finished just now. In the notification area on the upper right-hand side, I have the information about the status. Creating volume started, successfully created the volume. And now I have the volume also in the list here. To explain how the process works, when I'm configuring values via the Windows Admin Center surface, Windows Admin Center produces a PowerShell script in the backend. So when I decide to send this configuration, in my situation, it was create volume, then it sends the PowerShell to the target server and the PowerShell is executed there. This is what we have seen in the notification area. Then, when this has successfully finished, we need a short refresh. And when you look exactly at my screen, you have seen this took additional 1 or 2 seconds till the volume appeared here. So now I have the volume 04, and I can select the volume 04, and I can see some details about this volume. So the status is okay. The footprint is 3 terabyte. Why is the footprint 3 terabyte? The total size of the volume is 1 terabyte. This is the capacity I can use. The footprint is 3 terabyte, and this footprint results because I have an resiliency level of 3-way mirror. This is what we have as a configuration here in the 3-node Azure Stack HCI cluster. So 1 terabyte usable size results in 3 terabyte footprint. My advantage is that I have a 3-way redundancy. So if one server fails, I can survive additional disk failures in one of the remaining servers without any data loss and without any downtime here, this configuration. I have the path to the volume, and I can configure additional values, like the data deduplication and the encryption. Both is off in my configuration here. With the deduplication, I can save a lot of space, but it depends on your usage scenario if this is an interesting option here. When I created the volume, this space was consumed on my drives. So I have drives in my servers. I have 12 of these drives. And when I'm looking to the inventory, I can see these drives are actually filled by 42%. So actually, I only have a few virtual machines in this cluster, but the volume was created with a fixed size. We can also use thin provisioning as an exclusive feature in Azure Stack HCI. Then the behavior is different. But if we use fixed size volumes, we have the situation that the space on the disk drives is consumed as soon as I create the volumes. Let's do this again. Actually, we have 42% used on each of the drives. When I go to the summary of the drives, I can see used 19.5 terabytes used. Let's create a new volume. Go to the inventory. I create a new volume, and I will leave the default value, 3-way mirror, 1 terabyte sorry, not 1 gigabyte, 1 terabyte of volume size. More options. You can see I mentioned the thin provisioning. The default value can be configured. We will see this later in the live demo. We could switch to thin provisioning as a default value. I'm actually using the fixed provisioning because I want to show you the behavior on the disk drive. So three-way mirror, 1 terabyte of size here, volume 0.5, fixed provisioning. I will not use an integrity checksum. I will not use the encryption here. I want to create the volume. And again, the situation, we have the creating volume notification here. So actually the volume 0.5 is created. Then I can see the volume creation progress is running. So it's actually at something like 70% or something like this. And then when the volume was created successfully, I will see the volume a few seconds later in the list. If I don't want to wait till the volume appears automatically, I can use the refresh button here to refresh the list, and then I will have the volume 0.5. Volume 0.5, again, a volume with a fixed size, with 1 terabyte total size, 3 terabyte footprint. The volume is actually, regarding the capacity, completely empty. I only have a few metadata on it. I have a few gigabytes used size for the meta information. When I now switch to the drives, I will see it switched from 19.5 terabyte to 22.5 terabyte. So 3 terabytes more. This is the footprint. And when I'm looking to the inventory, I can see my disk drives are now filled with 48%. When we looked at this screen here last time, it was 42%. So because when we created the volumes, the extents were already written. So the three-way mirror already consumed his space, but actually we don't have any data in these new volumes. They are completely empty here. So volumes and drives we have seen here. Let's talk a little bit more about the drives, because drives, this is an area where users or customers are usually afraid of, because they know drives can fail. So what happens if one of these drives fail? Then we will have here a status that switches from success to warning or to error. Warning means something is not perfect with the drive. Error means this drive has failed. So we can retire such a drive manually. We can unretire the drive. What happens in Azure Stack HCI when a drive fails? Azure Stack HCI, we don't have any data loss because we have the three-way mirror. This means if an extent was written here, let's say the extent number or the extent A was written here, then we have the copy of the extent. Let's say here we have the A1, and here we have the A2 copy. This means we have the original, and this can be different. These are drives on different servers, and this can be different slots. So this is A, this is A1, this is A2, the copy. And for example, the next one could be here, and the copy could be here, and the second copy of this could be here. So it's always distributed across the servers, across the drives. So if a drive fails, we don't have any data loss, but we have reduced availability. So let's imagine this drive fails, not availability, this was the wrong word. We have reduced redundancy, because if this drive fails, and then maybe let's say this drive fails, then we still have the full availability of all the data, but we cannot survive an additional drive failure in the third server, because for sure, if we have the situation that this drive fails, the first one, then for example here the second drive fails, and then in the server 3 also the second drive, then we have a loss of the extent number A. because A was here, the first copy was here, and the second copy was here. And so we cannot survive these 3 simultaneous independent failures. But 2 independent failures are fine in a 3-way mirror. And this means for us, it's an advantage if Storage Spaces Direct in Azure Stack HCI tries to fix this disk failure, tries to ensure that this lost extents on the failed disk are rebuilt as fast as possible. And this is done automatically because when we go to the summary of the drives, we can see we have here our HDD capacity, and we have the used capacity, we have the available capacity, and we have the reserve. And the reserve, this is this area here at the end of this capacity bar. And when we keep this reserve, then Azure Stack HCI and the Technology Storage Spaces Direct try to rebuild the lost extents via this reserve capacity on the remaining drives. This means if in our configuration a drive fails, or in the first server drive fails and the second server drive fails, then we don't have any data loss. And Storage Spaces Direct will start immediately to try to run a rebuild with the remaining reserve capacity to bring the extents back to their initial redundancy. And this is great because when we go to the inventory of the drives, when we zoom in here again, let's imagine this first drive fails. Then we have several extents that were on this drive. And this drive has a size of 4 terabyte. But Azure Stack HCI only fills this drive up with 3 terabyte. So we only have 3 terabyte data stored on this drive to ensure that with the remaining drives, they have 1 terabyte free space. They have, each of these drives has 1 terabyte free. This also has 1 terabyte free and also 1 terabyte free here. This means that we can rebuild this 3 terabyte here with the 3 times 1 terabyte on the remaining drives. So if we give the system some time for this rebuild action, then we will have the full redundancy back, even if a disk drive failed. And then we can survive additional disk failures. So when the rebuild has finished, we could survive additional disk failures here and here because we have the full redundancy back. So this is great in Azure Stack HCI, and how this works can be configured in the settings. I will move to the full screen to ensure you can see everything. When I go to the settings here, on the lower left-hand corner, we have the storage settings, and then we have storage spaces and pools. In storage spaces and pools, it's a few seconds till the page is fully loaded. We can see, okay, what should happen if something changes in the storage spaces and pools. So if a drive fails, please automatically retire the drive. This is the default action. And then the storage repair speed is by default set to medium. If you want to prioritize the storage repair, you could switch to very high. Or if you want to prioritize your traffic, your workload, you can switch to very low. So here is the storage repair speed. Here is if retired failed drives should be, or if failed drives should be retired automatically. And the first option is for adding new drives. What should happen if I add new drives? Should they be automatically added to the pool, or is this a manual action? Standard is that these drives will be added automatically for bringing back the reserve capacity or extending the capacity. So if you don't have any issues, but you add drives, then you can extend your capacity. Default provisioning type, fixed. We have seen this. I can switch here to thin. This is only the default value. You can decide for each volume you create if it will be a thin or a thick provisioned or fixed provisioned volume, it's Azure Stack HCI exclusive. So we don't have the thin provisioning in storage spaces direct in Windows Server 2022. Here, customers are usually a little bit surprised because here we have Azure Stack HCI, but the storage pool version is Windows Server 2022. This is not a failure. This is planned to have this year because the storage pool version is actually named by the version of the Windows Server operating system it's related to. But always keep in mind the feature set is very, very different. We had this example with the thin provisioning and fixed provisioning. We have that stretch clustering that's only available in the Azure Stack HCI. And in Azure Stack HCI, we have all these Azure Stack HCI exclusive features from Azure. And they are enabled because Azure Stack HCI is registered to Azure. So the registration is here. And the Azure Arc integration status is enabled. Beginning with Azure Stack HCI 21H2, and in April, all the customers had to switch from 20H2 to 21H2. And if you have 21H2, your Azure Stack HCI cluster is automatically Azure Arc enabled. This brings many advantages. We will see this in a few minutes. So our connection status here is connected. Here I can see, okay, this cluster is successfully synced to the cloud within the last days. So no warning, no error. What does this mean? When it comes to the Azure Benefits, I want to take some of these exclusive features from Azure on my Azure Stack HCI cluster. For example, the extended security updates for Windows Server 2008, in the future also for Windows Server 2012 and 2012 R2, or the Windows Server Data Center Azure Edition, or features like this, then I have to enable the Azure Benefits for my cluster. Here I can see the Azure Benefits are activated for my cluster for each node on the cluster, and the expiration date is the 29th June this year. Why is this the 29th June? My cluster was recently connected today. The Azure Stack HCI registration, the last connect was today. And I always earn my Azure Benefits for 30 days. So when you are afraid or wondering how often do I need to connect to Azure, then my recommendation is to have a permanent connectivity to Azure, because for sure you will use great features like Azure Monitor, Azure Backup, and things like this. But if you have scenarios where you have sometimes, because of your internet connectivity or of the placement of your servers, a disconnected situation, then this still will work and still will run, because it's okay if we have a connectivity to Azure minimum every 30 days to refresh the Azure Benefits and to upload the CPU core information. This is important for the billing. So because we mentioned Azure Stack HCI is charged by core per month of the physical hosts. So we have seen this. When I switch to the virtual machines, I can decide for each virtual machine to activate Azure Benefits or to deactivate the Azure Benefits. So to bring extended security updates, to bring the Data Center Azure Edition, and so on to a specific virtual machine or not. When we have a closer look at the different values here, we can see the Azure Benefits. We talked about this. We have the Azure Stack HCI registration. Here we have information about the monitoring and service health data. Important is also the part activate Windows Server VMs, because in Azure Stack HCI, we don't have the virtual Windows Server usage rights included. To ensure that we are allowed from the licensing perspective to run virtual machines with a Windows Server operating system, we need Windows Server licenses for the hosts. And there are two different ways for acquiring, for purchasing the licenses for the physical hosts. The first option is to use the Windows Server subscription. This is available via Azure. This is available on a physical core basis per physical host. So when we decide for the option Windows Server subscription, we have additional costs per physical core per month. And this will bring Windows Server operating system to our environment. When we are using an existing Windows Server license, we have exactly the Windows Server licensing conditions we know from our traditional on-premises environments. So we have to license our physical hardware with minimum 16 cores, and this will result in virtual usage rights. We discussed this in a few sessions ago. You can review the sessions on the YouTube channels of Sven Langenfeld and also on my channel. That we had a tech talk about licensing for Windows Server. So Windows Server 2022 news and licensing. We have detailed information. So minimum 16 cores. The standard edition provides 2 virtual usage rights on the licensed host. The data center edition unlimited. Important is always to license the physical hardware. We can never license virtual machines, always the physical hardware. And existing Windows Server licenses can be volume licenses, but this can also be the OEM licenses you purchased with your hardware. So from your preferred Windows Server reseller option kit provider or OEM provider or partner, you can also use these licenses here. So 2 choices. First one, subscription. The second one, your traditional Windows Server license, but never for the VM, always for the physical host. This is very, very important to understand here. The activation of Windows servers. Interesting is also the resource bridge and the Azure Arc VM setup for Azure Stack HCI. To understand this, we should have a short look at our Azure portal, because till now we stayed in the Windows Admin Center. Now I will view the Azure resource in my Azure portal. I'm logging into the Azure portal here. What we see here now is the cluster we worked in Windows Admin Center in the Azure portal. This cluster here, you can see the 3-node configuration. You can see they are all Azure Arc connected. Here I can publish additional extensions to the servers. I can send configurations to these servers. And via this resources preview, I could deploy an Azure resource bridge on the target cluster to deploy virtual machines from within the Azure portal, to deploy virtual networks from within the Azure portal, to use VM images on premises and in the Azure portal from the same source. And if we have such an Azure Arc enabled server, an Azure Arc enabled Azure Stack HCI configuration with an Azure resource bridge, then we have the advantage that when we go for the virtual machines in the Azure portal, for example, let's select the virtual machines and let's create a new virtual machine. Then you can see here, I can create a virtual machine in Azure, or I can enable or create an Azure Arc enabled virtual machine. When I create the Azure Arc enabled virtual machine, I can see here an additional Azure region, and this Azure region is a custom location, and this custom location has the name of, in my case, HCI CL cluster 101 resource bridge 01. So it's a name, you can specify it via the region where it's located. So we have here the virtual machine kind. It's an Azure Stack HCI based deployment. and you can use your images you provide for your Azure Stack HCI configuration. So now we can use the Azure portal to manage our on-premises resources, to even deploy resources on our on-premises Azure Stack HCI cluster. So when we create virtual machines on premises, then we can use the virtual machines tool in the Windows Admin Center. There we have an inventory and a summary. Let's wait till the inventory is loaded. I can see my virtual machines. I can use the actual memory consumption and pressure. And I could create a new virtual machine here via this wizard. So for example, a 30 VM, the serial number 606. It's a generation 2. I have something like a small intelligent placement because it recommends a host to use here. It recommends me to use the host number 1. I have the virtual CPUs, the startup memory. I can select the virtual switch, for example, the VM switch. I can add some storage, the disks. I could install an operating system from an image file or from a network-based installation folder, or I can decide to install an operating system later and create this virtual machine. Again, this creation of the virtual machine is sent to the target host or target cluster. And then when the creation process has finished, we will see the virtual machine here in the list of the virtual machines. We can start this virtual machine here. We can configure the settings. We can manage this virtual machine and so on. So this is our tool for managing virtual machines and creating virtual machines here. Let's have a short look at the tools section here. These are all tools in the list. So the virtual machines is a tool, the dashboard, but there's an additional section that's called tools. And here we can see we have the updates and the diagnostics. Diagnostics is very helpful if you have any issue with your Azure Stack HCI cluster. Because if you have issues with your Azure Stack HCI cluster, you can use the diagnostics part to collect information about your cluster and send this directly to the support. Here I can see the installed versions of the diagnostics tools for hyperconverged infrastructure and network. I can update these tools. Here we can see there's a newer version for hyperconverged infrastructure tool. And via clicking to collect, I can collect all the information about my cluster. The latest configuration, the actual volumes. So this diagnostics information will also have my new volumes I created in this session. It will have information about the newly created virtual machines, about the Azure Stack HCI settings and so on, the Azure Stack HCI registration status and so on. So I will see in the report what values are configured. And this is helpful for the support because I can give away this result zip file here. The result is a zip file with all the information in there. I can provide this to the support of my hardware systems or to the Azure support. I can book as an additional service for $100 per month per customer. It's not per node, it's not per cluster, it's per customer. Then I have support also for Azure Stack HCI via the Azure support here. And here in this list, I will then have an additional entry. Actually, the first data collection was on 2nd April. Now, when this has finished, I will have an additional entry from 30th May. This is the diagnostics. The updates is helpful for patching this cluster because in Azure Stack HCI, we have the situation we'll receive a new Windows server, or sorry, a new Azure Stack HCI OS version every year, and we'll receive quality updates every month. And these updates have to be installed on our cluster. I want to provide these updates for my cluster, and via updates, this is provided automatically via a feature it's called cluster aware updating. This means that the first node is evacuated, it's switched to a maintenance mode, then this node is updated, it's restarted, then the virtual machines are moved back to this node, the second node is evacuated, the host is updated, and so on. And then finally, our complete cluster is updated without any interruption because we are using the live migration to move around the resources. This is available in the updates part here. It takes too long to really update this cluster here in the live demo, but I think you can imagine how it works. If you are running Azure Stack HCI on an integrated system, you have the advantage that the updates also provide the driver and firmware updates for your environment. If you have a validated node, then you have the situation that you only receive the operating system updates and you have to install the driver and firmware updates, if available, manually from the vendor pages here. So let's wait a few seconds till the list is loaded here, because then we see the result of checking updates. And we will see usually that there are some updates available for my cluster nodes here I could install on this Azure Stack HCI cluster. So last but not least, in the Azure Monitor, we could create monitoring via Azure for this Azure Stack HCI cluster. This is a real hybrid configuration because my Azure Stack HCI cluster is monitored regarding disk failures, capacity, errors or capacity limitations, and I can be notified automatically via mail if something happens here that changes any value to a value outside my pre-configured borders where the Azure Stack HCI should reside. So let's see here, my 3 nodes. I have several updates on each of these nodes. I have a May cumulative update for the OS. I have an Defender update, and I have a .NET Framework update here. The same on each node. I could install these updates here, and for sure, as I mentioned, if it's an integrated system, I will also receive the driver and firmware updates. So I think you can see it's really, really powerful how the Windows Admin Center works. A great tool is here available via security, because I mentioned this in one of our previous settings. We have several new security settings in Azure Stack HCI. These are the cluster settings for the core traffic and the storage traffic. And we have this secured core server option. In secured core, we can see if our servers meet the secured core requirements and if they are configured. Here in my demo environment, these servers are running in a nested scenario, so I don't have all the features there, but I could, for example, enable a trusted platform module. Then this would switch from not supported to on because it's available. I have configured this trusted platform module. And also the hypervisor enforced code integrity could be configured, and so on. So this is the security part. So let's have a look at 2 other clusters. Let's have a look at a 2-node cluster, because this was till the beginning of last week the smallest deployment for Azure Stack HCI. So let's have a look at this configuration here. I have 2 servers, and these servers build a high available Azure Stack HCI cluster. Everything is comparable to what we have seen in the 3-node cluster. We have here these 2 nodes. We have the status information, the virtual machines, the Azure connectivity, and so on. For sure, for the volumes, we have different options here. So now my Zoom, now it works again. So let's go to the volumes. And in the volumes, when I go to the inventory, I can see, okay, there's a 2-way mirror, and there's a nested 2-way mirror. There is no three-way mirror here for sure, because we don't have the third instance. We don't have any additional server. So these are the resiliency types we have here in the two-node configuration of Azure Stack HCI. So let's have a short look at the single node configuration, because the single node configuration is brand new. It was introduced last week. Let's switch to the cluster number 81. This is an Azure Stack HCI cluster. Let's wait for the dashboard to load. So in the dashboard, we can see similar information, no alerts. It's connected to Azure, number of drives, memory usage, and so on. In the servers, I can see this cluster only has one node, but everything is fine. I don't have any error or warning because there's no one node. And important is this node has the failover cluster service running. I only have one node, but the failover cluster service is running here. Why? We can extend a single node Azure Stack HCI cluster with additional nodes. So we can extend it to a 2-node cluster, to a 3-node cluster, to a 4-node cluster, and so on. This is only possible as easy as I described it when I have prepared everything. So the failover clustering is installed. For sure, we need Hyper-V. The data center bridging is installed, and so on. So everything is ready for a real redundant cluster. Here, actually, we are using the clustering only to provide the basis for the storage spaces direct configuration, because we also have storage spaces direct enabled here. There's storage spaces direct running here, but not with a distribution of data across the servers, but the data is written locally to one server, but we have the redundancy across the drives. So when we look at the drives, we can see here, okay, my 4 drives in this server, they have actually 30% used capacity. When I add additional volumes, additional capacity will be used. Important, we can have additional drives. It's also possible to have 5, 6, 7, and so on drives. For the single node configuration, actually only flash-only configurations with one disk type are supported. So single node only supports full SSD or full NVMe. Starting with 2 nodes, we can also have hybrid configurations with hard disk drives, or we can combine SSDs and NVMe drives. So this is really, really great, because the rest in the settings, when I look at the settings, and for example, things like the Azure Benefits or the activation of Windows Server VMs, this is all the same we have in the 2 and 4 node clusters. So via the Azure Benefits, for example, we can receive the extended security updates for Windows Server 2008, 2008 R2, then in the future 2012, 2012 R2 SQL Server. So this here means we are in the single node ISO Windows Server Data Center Azure Edition Azure Virtual Desktop, AVD, AKS, Azure Kubernetes Services, and much more. So everything that fits regarding the resources in one of these servers, in a single server deployment, can be also provided on the single node configuration. And let's see this resource in Azure. I have here the Azure Stack HCI registration of the single node cluster. And also in Azure, everything is prepared. So the single node Azure Stack HCI cluster was announced last week at Microsoft Build Conference, but it's available today. So you don't need any additional bits and bytes. You don't need any additional resources. And this situation we have seen here with the Azure portal, this is based on some connectivity issues I have here. This is not because of the single node cluster. If this does not work here, I can also open the Azure portal here from my local node. So there I have a different internet connectivity, and I can select here for Azure Stack HCI, and I can select the Azure Stack HCI cluster 81. And here I can see, okay, this is an Azure Stack HCI cluster. It's a single node configuration, not 2, not 3, not 5 nodes, not 16 nodes. It's a single node. We have the resources preview, we have the extensions and so on. So I would say a real great future ahead with this Azure Stack HCI configuration options, starting with from 1 node to up to 16 nodes. And Windows Admin Center is always our management tool. We don't need a Windows Admin Center for each Azure Stack HCI cluster. I'm running the Windows Admin Center on this machine here. So this is my Windows Admin Center gateway machine. This is my management host, and I'm managing all these Azure Stack HCI clusters with all their nodes on this gateway here. And I'm not forced to go back to the server core surface with the reduced graphical surface. I can always use this great graphical tools here. So feel free to send in your comments, your questions via the chat functionality about Windows Admin Center management for Azure Stack HCI. For sure, you can use the same Windows Admin Center to manage your traditional servers in your environment. For example, here, this domain controller I'm using for this environment. This can also be managed with Windows Admin Center. Here we can see a domain controller target with Windows Server 2022. This can be managed. I will zoom in for you again. Here, the Windows Server 2022, standard and data center for sure. But we can also manage the Azure Stack HCI operating system. It's a similar look and feel when I connect to such an Azure Stack HCI node, but the difference is here that the operating system for sure is Azure Stack HCI on this machine here, and it's part of an hyper-converged cluster here, the cluster number 30. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed this live demo about how to manage the Azure Stack HCI via Windows Admin Center. We have great additional topics for you ahead. We had in this month the focus on Azure Stack HCI. So we started with understanding Azure Stack HCI on May the 16th. And then we continued with the deployment and how to manage. So these were the Azure Stack HCI parts here. Hopefully you enjoyed these 3 sessions. In June, we are starting at the 13th of June. We're starting with benefits and licensing of Windows Server 2022. There I had a wrong information at the beginning of this session. I mentioned we already had a session about this. We had a Tech Talk Q&A session where you had questions about licensing. But our licensing session about Windows Server 2022 will be in the future in June 13th. We have in June the 20th, we have deployment and management and monitoring of Windows Server 2022. And we will see on June the 27th a demo about Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI. And I mentioned the Q&A calls. The Q&A calls, we had them on May the 12th and the 24th. This is always 1 hour for your questions you can send in via the live chat. On June the 21st, we will have the next Tech Talk Q&A where you can feel free to join. It's at 1 p.m. Our Tech Talks for the Tech Talk content are always on Monday at 12 p.m. So at 12 p.m. Central Eastern Time, depends on your time zone. And the Tech Talk Q&A on June the 21st is at 1 p.m. Central Eastern Time, so 1 hour for your questions. If you have any comments or questions for this session, feel free to leave them YouTube, also here in the live stream. And I'm looking forward to have you here on June the 13th when we are talking about benefits and licensing of Windows Server 2022. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest in this topic about Azure Stack HCI. Looking forward to see you in June. Bye.